Hi guys! So February is Black History Month and I'm going to read a couple books by Black authors. I started Transcendent Kingdom by Yaw Jessie and I read Homegoing by her and loved it. It's one of my favorite books ever. So I had to read her second novel and I started it on Spotify audiobooks while I'm waiting to pick it up from the library. So I really like listening to the audiobook and reading it like at the same time, depending on if I'm sitting down and reading or if I'm up doing chores or something, because it makes me go through books so much faster. So I'm going to read Transcendent Kingdom. I'm going to read Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin, and probably Freedom is a Constant Struggle by Angela Davis, because I've seen that circulating around recently. But yeah, it's really important to me to diversify my reading, so I'm really excited to read these books. So I'm in the same spot. I'm about halfway through Transcendent Kingdom, and I like it so far. I definitely don't like it as much as Homegoing, but it's still really good. It's about this girl named Gifty, and her family immigrates from Ghana to Alabama when she's really young. She doesn't really remember, or she wasn't even born. I'm pretty sure she was born in America. So she doesn't even know what Ghana was like, but her brother was born in Ghana. And she's a PhD student studying psychology in mice. So she works in a lab and essentially gets them addicted to Ensure and then studies their reactions to it. And it's really interesting because she's studying psychology and her mom has really bad depression spells and her brother dies of a heroin overdose. And it's really looking at the relationship between mental health and Ghanaian culture, which is interesting because obviously that's something I'm not used to. I think you would like this book if you work in the sciences or you study science, or if you were Christian or were religious and have kind of a complicated relationship with it, like maybe aren't anymore or are questioning it because you're a scientist. She talks about that a lot, about how she was born and raised Christian, and now that she's in the sciences, she goes to school and she's like, no one there believes in Christianity and she's like confused and conflicted about what to believe. So I related to that a lot because I was born and raised Christian and I'm in the sciences. So yeah, I definitely like that aspect of it. It's really well written. I love her writing, but I would say the storyline isn't as intriguing as Homegoing is. So I finished Transcendent Kingdom and it was good, but I think it's really hard once you read an amazing book by an author that's like one of your favorites of all time. It's like nothing else will compare to that. So I was expecting Transcendent Kingdom to be as good as Homegoing, and it just fell flat for me. Like, I just didn't like it nearly as much. Yeah, I don't know what to say. Like, I don't know what else to say about it. I really respect her and like her as an author. Storyline just was not for me, I don't think. And then I started reading Freedom is a Constant Struggle on the plane, and it's really interesting and informative, and it's obviously her opinions are like very, I don't know what's the word, like I'm a leftist, but hers is like crazy leftist, like communist, you know? So it's kind of interesting because I don't like necessarily agree with everything, but I just like, I feel like it's always good to read books like these. And I just like think that everything Angela Davis did was so amazing and cool, and it's like really nice to learn more about her. Basically, the book is about how every oppressed group is related to each other, but I haven't gotten that far yet, so I can't really like explain it well because I've just like read the beginning of the book. But right now it's just been like a couple interviews. The chapters are interviews with her, and then I think there's also a chapter that's a speech. So I'll talk more about it once I read more and learn more, but it's a good read. I'm like really glad I'm reading it. Okay, so I finished Freedom is a Constant Struggle, and I just wanted to share some of the stuff that I learned in this book. One of the craziest things while reading this that I noticed is a lot of the speeches are from 2014, and I think it was published around 2016. And just reflecting on how much has happened since then, I'm like, wow, we've made literally little to no progress. So in 2014, Obama was president, and she keeps talking about the Obama administration. The Trump administration is not even in here. It hadn't happened yet. And I was like, wow. And then also like, the everything that's going on now in Gaza, obviously that's more recent, and just the hope that she has for the rights of Palestinian people in here. I'm like, girl, nothing good has happened since then. So It's really, actually really jarring kind of to read this. I definitely wish that there was an updated version because it's kind of dated, honestly. So because it's so recommended right now for learning about Palestine, I thought there would be way more about Palestine in here, and there really isn't. Like, I'd say it's mostly about the prison industrial complex in America, and she mentions Palestine and just like kind of draws parallels to Palestine and like this IDF to Black Americans and the police here. So if you're looking for comprehensive information on the Palestine-Israel situation, I don't think I would recommend this. I did really like this though, and you know, it was Black History Month and it was a lot about racism in America, so it was perfect. She talks a little bit about herself, how she was arrested, how she was in the Black Panther Party. She didn't start the Black Panther Party, but she was in it at some point. She mentions the Black Panther Party's 10-point program, but doesn't list what they are, so I'm actually curious. I'm going to look that up. And she talks about the civil rights movement and how it was literally just like a legal stepping stone. Obviously, it was a huge deal, but she kind of talks about how there are so many things past that we still need to work on. So, for instance, she said, in many ways, it was a response to what were perceived as limitations of the civil rights movement. We not only needed to claim legal rights within the existing society, but also to demand substantive rights in jobs, housing, healthcare, education, and etc., and to challenge the very structure of society. So I think I'm just going to read a bunch of the things that I highlighted just to share. She also talked about how the prison industrial complex is very profitable. So basically, the United States makes money from putting people in prison, which explains a lot. So she said the obscene profits obtained from mass incarceration are linked to profits from the healthcare industry and from education and other commodified human services that actually should be freely available to everyone. So like I said, it's a lot about America in here. Also, what I thought was really interesting, she was talking about the police and how it doesn't necessarily matter who are the police officers, but the whole structure of the police system, which I feel like I learned a little bit in 2020 during the, the ACAB movement and everything. So she said, it doesn't matter that a Black woman heads the national police. The technology, the regimes, and targets are still the same. Let's say there's a police shooting, like police shoot an unarmed Black person. Yeah, that police officer goes to jail, but the structures basically create them to act that way. So it doesn't matter if it's like, oh, there's one bad egg, because they're like essentially still training people to react like that and to shoot people if they feel a sense of danger, which is, unconscious bias or conscious, but that's a whole other thing. I'm not even going to go into that fully. She also talks about a lot of historical events in the civil rights movement. So one of them was the March on Washington, and that there's a children's crusade. And I actually don't know much about this, but I'm pretty sure that new movie Rustin is about the March on Washington, so I need to watch that to learn more about it. But apparently there was a whole group of children that participated in that march, and she said, and this is something that's often forgotten, the role that children actually played in breaking the stronghold of silence regarding racism. So that was something new that I learned that was cool. And a quote from Nelson Mandela that said, "We know too well that our freedom is incomplete without the freedom of the Palestinians." And I think that was regarding the South African Constitution. Here's another little excerpt about Nelson Mandela. For a very long time, Mandela and his comrades shared the same status as numerous Palestinian leaders and activists today, and that just as the U.S. explicitly collaborated with the South African apartheid government, it continues to support the Israeli occupation of Palestine. Oh, this is crazy. The most profitable sector of the prison industrial complex is immigrant detention and deportation. Just so messed up. Also, Palestinians who have been transformed into immigrants against their will, indeed into undocumented immigrants on their own ancestral lands. Yeah. Martin Luther King Jr.'s quote, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." Okay, so Angela Davis talks about how she was on the FBI's 10 most wanted terrorist list. But there's this other woman, her name is Asada Shakur. I'm not gonna lie, I don't know who she is, and I need to research more about her. But basically she mentions her in this, but she doesn't explain who she is. I'm guessing because of the conferences she's speaking at, because these are all speeches. She assumes that everyone knows who she is. And it was really interesting because she's talking about herself and Asada being on the list and basically saying that they were not a danger to American society at all. If you think about a terrorist watch list, she's like, that's no. But she said it was about sending a message to large numbers of people whom they thought they could discourage from involvement in the freedom struggles at the time. So it basically was a threat to American citizens who wanted to be in the Black Panther Party. The government was threatening them by putting members of the Black Panther Party on the FBI watch list. And she mentions the Cuban Five, who I also have to look up. And she said the U.S. government holds in prison within this country 5 Cubans who attempted to prevent terrorist attacks on Cuba. They were investigating terrorism and in turn were charged with terrorism for the Cuban Five. So I need to look up that. That sounds interesting. And then she also gave a couple book recommendations. So I highlighted those to maybe read. Literally the only progress that I thought was cool was she said, and so we live with the ghosts of our past. We live with the ghosts of slavery. And I wonder why in 2013 we are not vigorously celebrating the 150th anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation. And now in 2024, I feel like Juneteenth is more of a celebration. I, again, have always thought, why didn't we? I guess I didn't get school off on Juneteenth because it was in the summer, so I didn't have school. But I just feel like it wasn't that big of a holiday, and now more places are getting work off. So it's the fact that that's, you know, what had to happen for people to pay attention to it. But I definitely think there's, you know, celebrations in big cities. So I think that's good that I'm like, oh, in 2024, like people are actually celebrating Juneteenth. She also said that former slaves brought public education to the South, that white kids in the South would never have had the opportunity to get an education had it not been for the persistent campaigns for education. Also, she talks about the Montgomery bus boycott and how Rosa Parks was, you know, the most famous historical figure that participated in it, but it was a huge group of women. So she said it was largely women within collective contexts, Black women, poor Black women who were maids, washerwomen, and cooks were people who collectively refused to ride the bus. And yeah, she said it made me feel that we've indeed come a long way, but at the same time I've regressed so much. I'm like, girl, I still feel that way 10 years later. And about mass incarceration, according to Michelle Alexander, there are more Black people incarcerated and directly under control of correctional agencies in the second decade of the 21st century than there were enslaved in 1850. Also that Native Americans lived in impoverished conditions on reservations, and they have an extremely high incarceration rate. As a matter of fact, per capita, the highest incarceration rate, which I didn't know. Okay, and then this is more like what I was saying about prosecuting police officers. So she said neoliberal ideology drives us to focus on individuals, ourselves, individual victims, and individual perpetrators. But how is it possible to solve the massive problem of racist state violence by calling upon individual police officers to bear the burden of that history, and to assume that by prosecuting them, by exacting our revenge on them, we would have somehow made progress in eradicating racism? So that's interesting too, because obviously we want them to be prosecuted and, you know, to be held accountable for their actions, for killing people, and for showing other police officers that that's what's going to happen if you kill someone. But it's true. It's like, it's not going to solve the problem. One thing that I hadn't really heard about before, I know that the prison system is messed up, but she said prison basically doesn't work, and that the majority of people who are in prison are there because society has failed them, because they've had no access to education or jobs or housing or healthcare. And I thought that really made me think about it, because obviously, and I kind of want to pick someone else's brain about this, I kind of was like, well, if you, like, for instance, the police officers, like, they should go to prison if they kill someone unarmed, or, like, you know, if you kill people, shouldn't you go to prison and just be, because there's so many people that actually are a danger to society. So maybe she's more so talking about non-violent crimes, but she didn't really go into that. But that was pretty much all the stuff that I highlighted. I just wanted to share with you guys the stuff that I learned in case you're interested in reading this. Right now, though, I have to take a break with the books by Black authors because I have book club coming up and we're reading Lady Chatterley's Lover. So I'm going to read that, and then I'm going to come back and read Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin. So I couldn't even do the whole normal reading update thing for this because I finished the entire thing in one day. It's only 160 pages, but I was so captivated by it. It's about this expat named David who moves to Paris, and he's going to marry this girl, but she goes to Spain for a little bit just to think and clear her head and decide if she wants to marry him. And he gets into this group of gays, essentially, and meets this barman named Giovanni at their friend's restaurant. And the book is about him and Giovanni's relationship and David, the main character, coming to terms with his sexuality, really struggling with his sexuality, which makes sense because at the time it was so forbidden. It also takes place in the Lost Generation expat era of Paris, which is really special to me and I really like learning about because I studied abroad there 5 years ago, 5.5. Believe that 5 years ago. I'm like, study abroad changed my life, and it literally was 5 years ago. But we learned a lot about the Lost Generation expats there, and that's how I learned about James Baldwin in the first place. So his descriptions of Paris were just so beautiful and picturesque, and I could picture everything exactly. This is my review that I wrote on Goodreads. Oh my god, I finished this in a day. An exploration of relationships and sexuality in the Lost Generation era of expats in Paris. So captivating, beautiful, and heart-wrenching. Main character was so frustrating and complex. I loved the descriptions of Paris. I could picture it perfectly. Writing is exceptional. Baldwin knows how to write a romance. And the last sentence. The writing blew me away. I wanted to highlight so many things. I can't decide if I want to highlight in my books or not, so I didn't with this one. But it was so beautiful. The last sentence, the symbolism of the last sentence, I just finished the book and I was like, oh, it really blew me away. And because the main character, David, is grappling with his sexuality, he really resents Giovanni and kind of blames Giovanni for turning him gay or opening floodgates into him being gay. The main character was so frustrating, but you kind of understood his frustrations because of how, being gay was perceived at the time. I would highly recommend it. I gave it 5 stars. But that's it. Those are all the books by Black authors that I read for Black History Month. Let me know if you read any books for Black History Month. Bye. Thanks for watching.